Hello everyone, it's Rob here. Listen, it's YouTube. You know what to do. Hit the bell and the thumbs up, right? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye. These dirtbag left stars are flirting with the far right. Their podcasts and shows are full of boogaloos, deep state conspiracies, and even great replacement talking points. Which side is this again? By Alexander Reed Ross. Over the past year, as the far right trafficked in wild anti-masker and pro-Donald Trump fantasies that led to the January 6th putsch on the Capitol, some prominent members of the dirtbag left and radical left have been promoting figureheads in the Boogaloo movement, circulating deep state conspiracies and bantering about great replacement talking points, ones that can sometimes sound an awful like the fever dreams of the alt-right. By the way, great job on Jimmy Dore for, without Jimmy Dore, there's no story here. It's like his sort of tepid association with the online left stuff has now kind of allowed them to push this kind of big umbrella, because it was incredibly stupid that he talked to the Boogaloo people, as I and many others were pointing out. Take, for instance, Jimmy Dore, the populist YouTuber and member of the Movement for a People's Party Advisory Council. He recently courted a public relations disaster when he offered a platform to Magnus Panvidya, a member of the Boogaloo Boys, a militant group that threatened violence ahead of Biden's inauguration. Emerging into the public eye last spring during right-wing anti-lockdown protests, the heavily armed Boogaloo Boys have promoted attacks against the state and government officials in retaliation for COVID safety restrictions. But Panvidya, who sports a rainbow flag in his Twitter bio, offered the movement a more palatable pro-LGBT and anti-racist face. Panvidya has also tweeted that Kyle Rittenhouse, the Trump supporter who shot 3 men, killing 2 of them during turbulent anti-racism protests over the summer, was in his right to defend himself. So, great. Good job, Jimmy, again. During the interview with Dore, titled Radical Michigan Anarchist Seeks Unity with the Left. Anarchist, too, yeah. Oh, boy. Panvidya posed in front of a rainbow Don't Tread on Me flag and talked about why the Boogaloos are anti-cop. He asserted it is the top versus the bottom, it's not the left versus the right. Dore then listed the things they agree about. We could agree on the war, we could agree on corporate control of our government, we could agree on police brutality. We're not going to agree on the Second Amendment. You know what? I tell you what, I go back and forth on the Second Amendment. So they basically agree on everything, right? Dore, who reportedly just dropped $1.9 million on a Los Angeles bungalow, has gotten populist mileage of himself out of anti-lockdown sentiment, asking why small businesses closed while Amazon was allowed to remain open, saying that the World Health Organization was cautioning against the lockdowns and characterizing the lockdowns on gyms, salons, and sporting goods stores as creating death. He also aired a protester who opposed COVID-19 restrictions as a conspiracy and a tyranny. It's a complex ecosystem. Well, this is the thing too, because I think you can do a piece on Dore, because I've talked plenty about how I find Dore kind of obnoxious and does kind of, I think that's kind of legitimate criticism with Dore, that he does kind of flirt with right-wing talking points often, but then lumping them in with with Chapo or TrueAnon, I think is kind of fucking weird. Weird sort of leftist who supports Tulsi over Bernie. That's right, bigger wig. Jimmy Dore was so supportive. That's how much he supports Medicare for all. And then anyone who doesn't agree with everything he says doesn't like Medicare for all and actually is a pro health insurance company person. And when you're as pro M4A as Jimmy Dore is, that's why in the presidential primary you support the candidate that does not support Medicare for all instead of the one that does. And that's a little thing called 4D chess, okay? It's a complex ecosystem. When you map the strange areas of crossover between the political fringes, in some cases leftists pay tribute to aspects of right-wing conspiracy theories, ostensibly to coax some from the right into left-wing populism. On the other side, some leftists genuinely seek to transcend the boundary between left and right entirely to create a populist moment that challenges what they see as the elites. Well, and that's the other ridiculous thing about Jimmy Dore's argument, right? When you look at these right-wing libertarians and being like, oh yeah, we agree that cops shouldn't brutalize people. We agree that the American military shouldn't be all over the place. We agree on things like the drug war and things like that. This is this is 2008 Ron Paul mindset. Oh look, they support legalizing drugs. We basically agree on a whole bunch of stuff. We should just team up. And then we can get rid of the elites. And then because we agree on all this stuff, well, we should also probably take a look at some of the things that we don't agree on. Because while that might be true, we might agree that the United States shouldn't be doing all these foreign interventions and overthrowing other governments. We shouldn't have a drug war. We shouldn't have mass incarceration. Yes, we're in agreement on that. But when it comes to like what the role of the government is supposed to be and like helping people's lives, it turns out we have some very different ideas about how that's supposed to work exactly. And a lot of these folks as well are very, very allergic to the idea of like having a strong federal government that like gives people things like housing and healthcare and stuff like that. It turns out they're not really into that shit at all. So it's like, it's a little bit silly, I think, to say like, oh yeah, we look at all this stuff we agree on, it's great, while ignoring the basic fundamental difference in how these two sides view the role of like government and culture and society, the huge vast gulf that exists between these two kind of viewpoints. I think it's probably not a great idea to just like paper over all that. QAnon is not fundamentally right about the cabal part. That's ridiculous. Well, I think you can, if you take cabal, I mean, I think it's got some troubling connotations, but it's also it is describing just an elite sect at the top of society. And we do know from the Epstein case that many of these people do in fact deal with things like sex trafficking and a whole lot of like messed up shit. I mean, that seems undeniable to me. I think when you have the right-wing version of that, it's a Jewish thing. And when you have the TrueAnon or the left-wing version, it's not exclusively a Jewish thing. It's just something it's about capitalists. The Clinton, Epstein, Weinstein, Wall Street connections is more sophisticated than it can be, but it's evil hiding in plain sight. Yeah, they're describing something very, very real. And suggesting that there's some similarity between the people that believe correctly that this shit goes on with the people that believe this shit goes on and it's exclusively a liberal Democratic Party thing and the whole, and like it's being like controlled by Jewish puppet masters and stuff. Like there's a huge gulf in between these two things. Playing footsie with the right is not a common thing on the neo-socialist left, but there's a subset of this latter group, a small but influential band who can veer into legitimizing the talking points of the extremist right. The extremely online denizens of both movements hide behind a mask of irony on issues like racism, feminism, and equal rights, promoting reactionary memes and language that is often taken not so ironically by their followers. Whether it's anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers, anti-lockdown types, those who believe in pedophile cabals or deep state conspiracists, media personalities who peddle such tropes are engaging in a sordid ecosystem that draws left and right together on false premises. While this may be a profitable enterprise, it encourages polarization while claiming to unite the people against the elites. You know, one thing I will say is that there is definitely a trend of like people using ironic, racist, or sexist language. And you can go into the motivations for people to do that, whether it's just to be humor, just to shine a light on certain things. But when you look into like what a lot of like the followers of a lot of these people that kind of use that kind of language, they're often using it in very less ironic and less subtle ways. I do think that is used as kind of an excuse to cover up a lot of legitimate racism that people express sometimes. And like, yeah, I think there's a difference sometimes between people that are like comedians or people that like are good at talking about this kind of shit. I don't think it's like inherently impossible to ever kind of use that kind of edgy humor, but a lot of the followers, the people that follow accounts that do this kind of stuff, are definitely like learning, I think, shitty lessons from this. And like there are many people that like when you dig into like what these communities are about, are indeed quite racist, which is something that I think we should be honest with ourselves about. Sounds like subreddits that start in irony and just become people that love it. Yeah, I think there's a legitimate problem with that on the left. I don't want to like legitimize what this article is because I think it's mostly full of shit. But I also don't think we should just reflexively turn away from this idea that like there are in fact people on like popular figures on the left that traffic in this kind of like ironic racism and sexism that, if they don't hold those beliefs themselves, definitely have followers and fans that use that as an excuse to do their own kind of like much less sophisticated so-called ironic racism and sexism, which is pretty much just racism and sexism for real. Explaining the appearance of Panvidya on Door's show, one former Boogaloo boy who spoke on the condition of anonymity noted, "Of course, there are a lot of these guys trying to rehabilitate the image of the movement. Any of them jockeying for attention will say whatever they think will make people sympathetic or take a softer view of them. This seems obvious." Yeah, it's like sometimes these guys are not honest about what they believe. They are capable of lying. So I don't doubt there is gaslighting going on. As researcher Matthew Lyons observed in his text Control-Alt-Delete, alt-right commentators have admitted to co-opting the rainbow flag and other signifiers to capitalize on wedge issues that could help split members of the left from a liberal coalition and bind them to elements of the far right. And Boogaloo boys certainly have a dark side. One Boogaloo boy, a former Air Force sergeant, was arrested for shooting 2 security officers in Oakland last year, killing one. That was some of the only killings that happened, from a law enforcement-related person through all those uprisings last year was from this Boogaloo boy guy. As much as the right has tried to frame those uprisings as being like inherently violent. Police arrested another for plotting to bomb a hospital. Despite the group's fixation on pedophiles, which the Anti-Defamation League attributes to the influence of QAnon and Pizzagate, 2 Boogaloo boys have been arrested on pedophilia-related charges. Boogaloo boys are built around a racist meme that spread on 4chan, where QAnon developed and used the same talking points about QAnon seen among other populists. But they are a fragmented community with little ideological consistency. Some members believe in fascist and far-right ideology. One Telegram channel associated with the Boogaloo Boys that has 9,327 subscribers denounced Trump in favor of a more extreme right-wing position, insisting the current administration is dedicated to protecting pedophiles after Jeffrey Epstein suicided and Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested. They're laughing at you. No, really, these people want you broke, dead, your kids raped and brainwashed, and they think it's funny. Well, and that's too, when it gets to that reminds me of the shooting at the synagogue in Pittsburgh and how the people on the right tried to downplay that, being like, oh, that's not like a right-wing thing. This guy hated Trump. And it's like, yeah, he was one of these alt-right online guys who hated Trump because he was not anti-Semitic enough and because he supported Israel and had Jewish family members and stuff. It's like that's the real distinction between the far right and the alt-right, pretty much in that case, is just like whether you in your racism and in your toxic swamp of conspiracy theories, whether you blame the Jews or whether you support Israel, and you're just kind of like a conservative that believes everything that the really far right guys believe, except the thing about the Jews controlling the whole world and everything like that. Another reporter on the left, Alex Rubinstein, who has reported, this is going to be a fucking probably shit show, isn't it? The discourse around this as well. Another reporter on the left, Alex Rubinstein, who was reported for the Russian state-backed RT America. Who cares about that? Which U.S. intelligence identified as a player in Russian election interference in 2016. It's just a state broadcaster. I mean, lots of states have different state broadcasters. Recently shared a video of Panvidya at a protest stating, "Time to rethink the left-right paradigm." Rubinstein also called a pro-Second Amendment protest involving Boogaloo Boys and a black gun rights group last July and multiracial armed movement and actual solidarity. It's that meme, "I got your back, bro," the Klan guy and the Confederate flag guy. In another tweet on the January 6th Capitol attack, Rubinstein declared, "The left thinks the blue-collar MAGA people who stormed the Capitol are their political enemies. Blue-collar, we've been over this. This is how we lose. Our enemies should be the political elite and the oligarchy. We should be trying to convince the people who stormed the Capitol, not trying to ID them for the FBI." These were all petty bourgeois, fucking jet ski dealership people. And cops. Half the people that were storming the fucking Capitol were cops. I don't think you're going to convince them to become socialists. Rubinstein emailed the Daily Beast to note, "It is important to point out here that I did not call for Boogaloo solidarity. In my tweet, I commented on a Boogaloo-aligned speaker donning a rainbow pride flag at a rally who praised Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and right-wing militias in the same breath. I wrote that it's time to rethink the left-right paradigm. This is a position I have previously advocated, believing the distinction is outdated, having originated from where politicians in France sat in the 1700s in the État Général. I do not think it's controversial to say that not everybody in our modern hyper-connected world fits neatly on one side." He went on to note, "I was arrested and eventually cleared of felony rioting charges while reporting on anti-fascist protests during Donald Trump's inauguration. I was 10 feet away from the car attack in Charlottesville and had earlier photographed the perpetrator as he was being guarded by police officers. There are just a few highlights of my experience taking on actual fascists, and I've never argued in favor of alliance with those holding fascist beliefs." Well, okay, that's great though, but that's the thing about these Boogaloo voices, that they do indeed hold fascist beliefs despite saying to the contrary sometimes. I do not condone the Boogaloos outright, but there is a huge amount of video evidence taken by independent reporters that demonstrates some of them hold anti-racist and anti-authoritarian views. As for fascists in their ranks, I completely disavow. Penvideo did not respond to a request for comment. I think that's pretty stupid. This whole thing of like even suggesting that there's like crossover with this, as I've been over, I think is dumb, and just gives you kind of like gives ammunition to people like this to write these kinds of hit pieces. In the aftermath of Penvideo's appearance on Door's show, the filmmaker Rod Weber tweeted a thread of unpublished segments of an interview he did with Door. Door did not respond to the thread. When Weber tells Door that Penvideo has defended Rittenhouse, Door acknowledges that's a big problem, right? So then what do we do? What do we do when a guy like that shows up with the guy from Antifa and Black Lives Matter and claims all the things he claims? Weber's response, vet them more before pitting them out on the internet to tons of people to let them just say what they want unchecked. Door notes, I had no idea about the Kyle Rittenhouse thing when I interviewed that guy. Maybe you should probably check into that ahead of time. Door then tells Weber the fact that we're making it toxic for Americans to talk to other Americans in this moment now when our government is abandoning us, and we all know that there might be a civil war coming. It's more important now than ever to talk to people because of COVID, because we're all being screwed by the government. It's called class consciousness. You don't recommend that some of our people in our same class we don't talk to. You don't recommend that. And again, it's like you can keep saying that, but you're talking about people that hold diametrically opposed opinions as to like what kind of a society we're supposed to live in, that like have completely diametrically opposed opinions on things like healthcare and childcare and education and like what the fucking role of the government is supposed to be. When reached by the Daily Beast, Door said that his lockdown statements were referring to a statement from the World Health Organization on total lockdowns that noted in part, we in the World Health Organization do not advocate lockdowns as the primary means of control of this virus. The only time we believe a lockdown is justified is to buy you time to reorganize, regroup, rebalance your resources, protect your health workers who are exhausted, but by and large, we'd rather not do it. Door added, I advocate for lockdowns as one tool to fight the pandemic. My concern about lockdowns are shared with the World Health Organization about the effects of lockdowns on working people and economically vulnerable people. It is why I've been an outspoken champion for government financial relief to people affected by the lockdown and the pandemic. I'm also a staunch supporter of single-payer healthcare. I do not believe COVID-19 restrictions are a conspiracy. Lockdowns are not tyrannical. Closing down people's business is a matter of policy without providing workers financial relief is. Door has a point there, of course. The fact that, lockdowns would have been an effective way to control this pandemic if people were getting like actual support from their government, not like a $1,400 check 1 month and another $1,000 check 6 months later, but like monthly checks and monthly support and like rent relief and debt relief and things like that. So that's of course a failure of capitalism and a failure of America to like do what has to be done because they can't grind the economy to a halt. Well, what's the point of all this? I mean, to me, it seems like the point is just like to allow liberals and centrists to feel better, to discount the very valid points that are being made on the left about economic conditions, about the elite tier of society who do in fact do a lot of evil, terrible things, including sex trafficking, which we know this with absolute certainty. And I think the whole point of this is to suggest that people that believe this kind of stuff are kind of these extremists, and using these examples primarily from Door, which again, thank you, Jimmy, as a way to make liberals and centrists feel better about their own worldview, and making the connections in people's minds that worrying about things like elites and what they're up to, and focusing on this stuff is some kind of like radical conspiracy that's on the same level as right-wing stuff. That's what I think the point of this is. All of the good fiction writing now is self-published essentially and coming from the so-called alt-right, and my haters can quote me on that. Lots of right-wing boys got on board and really liked it, and I feel like those are the real fans of that podcast. Perfume nationalist co-host Jack Mason on Red Scare. I don't think you can really deny that they kind of lean into right-wing talking points as well on a number of levels, but I don't really listen enough to comment on it that much. Right, I think they're using what Door, I think that's pretty accurate, Red Scary. I think they're using what Door and Red Scare do to discredit the very real and well-researched work TrueAnon does on their show. Yeah, it's lumping it's taking the very real mistakes and very real kind of reactionary things that people like Jimmy Dore do and Red Scare does, and using that to like lump everything on the sort of left under that umbrella to convince people that like any of these very real concerns are all just kind of part of this kind of baseless conspiracy theory that's no different from the right wing. It's like the people using problematic figures on the ML left to discredit MLs. That's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, after the left-wing Red Scare podcast invited Trump ally Steve Bannon on the show to discuss populism, healthcare in China last April, far-right website The Post Millennial rejoiced that the establishment types on left and right are left behind by the populist approach. The traditional positions of left and right are basically up for grabs, and neither party can own them as the ideologies shift. Yeah, so again, great job reaching out to Steve Bannon and building those bridges. Steve Bannon, definitely a guy that you want to be involved with if you're part of like the left. On the podcast, a Red Scare co-host asked Bannon a question about collaboration, commenting, "It seems like we agree on a lot of things. Can the anti-establishment left and right work together in any meaningful way?" Bannon replied, "I think we can. I don't think there's any doubt about that. There's definitely common ground. I get contacted by a lot of people on the left all the time." I mean, Bannon wants to like fucking nuke China and put a psychotic religious cult in charge of China. Do we agree on that? Do you think if we work with Steve Bannon on overthrowing the establishment, do you think that's something we're just going to have a debate on? Do you think Steve Bannon agrees about like what the government's role in like things like immigration should be or healthcare? Somehow I think that even though we might have some kind of common ground in saying like elite's bad, I'm not so sure that fucking Steve Bannon is ultimately going to be on our side any more than the elites that would be getting overthrown in that hypothetical scenario would be. When discussing the deadly white nationalist march in Charlottesville, a Red Scare co-host called Antifa and ethno-nationalist sides of the same clownish coin. Yeah, so that's great. So they get into the anti-Me Too stuff. And again, with Me Too stuff, I mean, Me Too is the result of female moral panic over male sexuality masquerading as social justice, female irrationality gone awry. And this is what they're kind of like elevating, this kind of viewpoint. And you see how liberals, and with their like the way that they very cynically use things like Me Too to advance their own agenda, while then excusing people like Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and Andrew Cuomo when they do the same thing. You then see how that gives ammunition to people like this that end up just saying, look, they're just like, they don't actually believe in it. It's not even about protecting women from sexual assault, or it's not even about calling people to account. It's purely about advancing their political power. And you have no real response to it, because that is, in fact, what for many liberals, that's what it is. One reliable area of overlap. So here's where you get into the serious shit as well. One reliable area of overlap between the far left and QAnon types is the question of Jeffrey Epstein's death and the conspiracy of deep state involvement, along with the conviction that Hollywood and political elites are running pedophile rings that the powers that be tacitly condone or even participate in. So this is just like, this is a completely uncontroversial. I feel like it would be weird to not believe that. Questions about Jeffrey Epstein's death, how, like, who doesn't have questions about Jeffrey Epstein's death? I mean, and the conspiracy of deep state involvement, along with the conviction that Hollywood and political elites are running pedophile rings that the powers that be tacitly condone or even participate in. I mean, look at fucking Weinstein. Like, this isn't just this is not a conspiracy. We know exactly what happened. This was like a powerful guy in Hollywood. He's a powerful guy in the Democratic Party. You also have people like Ed Buck. Ed Buck is responsible for now multiple deaths. You have Clinton, a number of other people. Democratic donor Ed Buck charged with operating drug dose after two men found in home. Like, the idea that this is some like wacky conspiracy theory, it's just there's ample evidence for this exact thing. Like, it would be Bryan Singer, thank you, is another example. It's like saying people are crazy for being suspicious of JFK's death. This is like the majority position. Yeah, the post-left consists of a handful of annoying super online assholes. It's silly that people engage with it like it's a major threat. And yes, Base Magic, that's a good point. And again, this is what we see, which is you have these genuine weirdos and kind of pseudo crypto reactionaries on like the left, and these are real people with definitely shitty beliefs and are, you know, toxic and shitty people. But then they're using this to discount the entire kind of like online left or the as a whole, or to suggest that anyone that believes in like this kind of conspiracy theory just belongs in that kind of tent. Can we have more capybara content at some point? Yes, we can. We can absolutely do that. This talking point about QAnon, that its belief about pedophile elitists being protected by the neoliberal establishment is valid, was recently elevated by Rolling Stone contributing editor and left-wing writer Matt Taibbi, who asserted that the underlying thought that it's a coalition of Trumpists who are taking on these elitists who want to take over the rest of society. There's a core of like emotional truth animating the QAnon theory. Okay, so I think what Matt Taibbi said there was a stupid way of phrasing something that's like the point that he's making is real. The underlying thought that there are indeed pedophile elitists being protected by the neoliberal establishment. Of course there's a core emotional truth to that. Yes, that is true. There's plenty of evidence of this. That's not a conspiracy theory whatsoever. Similarly, Chapo Trap House's Matt Christman avowed in an interview with the TrueAnon podcasters last year, there are two basic premises to QAnon. One is right and one is wrong. That's why I say it's a 50-50 thing. The premise of we're ruled by a cabal of cannibalistic, psychotic sexual abusers, and all the institutions that they create are to further their dominance over us, correct. And that Donald Trump is going to stop them, incorrect. That is 100% accurate. That's always been the thing. And that's actually why I suspect like QAnon and Pizzagate was a op, like a psyop, like a state, like that was, they deliberately spread these wacky conspiracies for this exact reason, because they take this very real feeling that people have, they tie it into this like extreme far right weird mythology, and then that opens the door to make articles like this where it's like anyone that believes this stuff is part of this wacko conspiracy theory community. And the same thing happened with 9/11, folks. The same thing happened with 9/11, with the 9/11 truther movement. Also, I believe a psyop to ensure that people stopped asking questions, very important questions about what went down with that. It's the same, but it's the same principle. And if you look into Roger Stone's career, that's like the kind of shit that he does. And he was heavily involved in promoting Pizzagate through Jack Posobiec. Jack Posobiec is a Roger Stone guy. And there's no doubt in my mind that they absolutely did create that conspiracy theory in order to run cover for the very powerful people that do in fact do this exact same shit. Like this statement that Matt Christman made in this interview that they're quoting negatively in this piece, 100% correct. We're ruled by a cabal of cannibalistic, psychotic sexual abusers, and all the institutions that they create are to further their dominance over us. I mean, what further evidence do you need to see for you to believe that that's true? I mean, there's more than enough evidence to like just accept that as being correct, and that Donald Trump is going to stop them. Incorrect. Yeah, of course. That's why I believe that was a right-wing op, because it allowed that exact same behavior to continue, but spun it into this pro-Trump thing, which is ultimately just like a pro-elite thing. It's like propping up the very exact people that are perpetuating it. Should be taken with a grain of salt, but it's so fucking entertaining. I have mixed feelings on this. I've talked about it before. I don't want to get into it right now. I was very inspired by Chapo immediately after Trump was elected. It kind of pointed in like a positive direction for a way to like move forward, that in a way of making sense of the world. I was very inspired by them to like do the shit that I'm doing now. I certainly wouldn't be doing the shit I'm doing now if I hadn't been inspired by the work they were doing. But over the course of developing my own platform, a bunch of the people like in their orbit and friends of theirs seem to really like find me annoying and have said mean and hurtful things about me. So now I just don't listen to the show anymore because it makes me depressed to listen to it. But I do think they serve an important function, and from the Chapo members that I've talked to, they've been very nice to me. But there's people like in their crew in their orbit who think that I'm corny and that I suck and have said mean and hurtful things about me. So now I don't listen anymore. In the interview with TrueAnon's Brace Belden and Liz Franzak, who has also appeared on the Perfume Nationalist podcast. What is that fucking Perfume Nationalist? Chrisman and his fellow podcasters riff on Epstein's death in lockup and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell's recent arrest. This has to be the result of some sort of factional contest within the intelligence community or deep state or whatever, because somebody kept her alive for all those months, Chrisman says. They then veer into prime conspiracy territory when Belden riffs on how he could see the deep state drugging Maxwell. It's like what happened to Jack Ruby, to supposedly discredit her testimony in court between digs at the center-left. Literally, a minority of people think Epstein killed himself, Belden says. That's true. Chrisman adds, a majority of Biden voters, though. Belden complains, but this is a thing that everybody knows. Everybody knows that the government of factions within the government likely had something to do with it. But you can't do anything about it. That's what drives people so crazy. That's just contributed to how insane everybody is. And you see also how, instead of pointing out when people start talking about these conspiracy theories and being like, sorry, this is offending my sense of symmetry. You can also point to the fact that, like, the U.S. government has created the exact set of circumstances that are necessary for people to start believing these exact conspiracy theories, because they've spent the last 70 fucking years lying and murdering and doing all kinds of insane shit. So then, as there is in fact a deep state and a national security establishment, and they absolutely have been up to some like incredibly fucked up shit over the last several decades, like COINTELPRO, MK Ultra, all the CIA mind control shit, all the coups, the fucking black site torture chambers, right-wing death squads. Like, of course, they've been responsible for so much shit. So much of it has been secretive, and so much has been like covert. So of course people start getting sucked into these conspiracy theories and start wondering, well, if they did this and this and this and this, and we know that they did this, why? Like, what else have they been up to that we don't know about? That's like a completely logical way to. It's completely logical to start asking those questions. Personally, I think there would be a lot less QAnon supporters if the U.S. government hadn't assassinated thousands of people and run programs like MK Ultra. This is what I'm saying. Yeah. I guarantee you this writer thinks that Gladio never happened. Yeah, this is exactly what I mean. Like, how can you believe that there's no fucking deep state, despite the decades of evidence showing what the United States national security establishment has been up to, regardless of who's the president and regardless of what people in the United States are actually voting for? While the hosts agree that QAnon is so there we go. There's your whole fucking. You're trying to draw a comparison between what these people believe. And you say right off the bat, well, the hosts agree that QAnon is a deranged theory, so it turns out this is just complete, like, what are we doing here then? And while Franzak cautions her co-hosts against granting single consciousness to every wing of the American bureaucracy working in tandem with each other, the three male hosts seem to nod to the conspiracy's appeal. In a discussion on Trump's lawyer and Epstein advocate Alan Dershowitz, Chrisman jokes that Trump is a white-hat pedophile who's trying to lure all the other pedophiles into a false sense of security and then spring the trap on them. Host Hassan Piker exclaims, and that's how we tie this neatly back to the QAnon conspiracy theory. There you go. Which is 100% correct, Belden jokes. No, Liz and Hassan say. When was this? When was Hassan Piker on TrueAnon? I don't remember that. No, Liz and Hassan say, it's 50% correct, says Chrisman more seriously. Like 30, 40, 30%, says Belden. So they're just, like, this is obviously joking. Like, they're obviously just, like they're fucking riffing with each other and joking, but this writer is obscuring the very real point that's being made. Later, when talking about QAnon's evolution into a Trumpist personality cult, Chrisman declares everything that's wrong and insane about QAnon comes from that end of the spigot. The first premise, that the ruling class is a pile of cannibalistic psychotic sexual abusers, is correct. Chrisman did not respond to a request for comment sent through Twitter. Much of TrueAnon's approach tends to mix humor and seriousness. Yeah, no shit. In the same way it plays on the third rail of conspiracy theories and their tropes. In one interview with the LA Review of Books, Belden said, I literally think that rich people are vampires in every sense of the word. Psychic vampires, money vampires, sex vampires, blood vampires. They have a totally different, absolutely warped sense of morality and society. I don't know who's going to argue with that. I'm not going to argue with that at all. Why would you argue against that? And in fact, this is something I picked up from Leslie Lee III of Struggle Session. Because referring to this like elite cabal as like lizard people. There's like that's like an anti-Semitic trope in and of itself. So we should avoid doing that, even though I think that does kind of get at something that people feel that's real about how like fucking inhuman these people feel with their lack of empathy, their lack of humanity. So I think that's like a real, and not when I say these people, I'm talking about like the elites, the capitalists, not any specific member of like a religious sect. That's why I think it is helpful to refer to these people as vampires instead of lizards, because lizards it does have this like anti-Semitic trope element to it. But if you refer to them as vampires, which is a pretty accurate description of how these people operate and what their values are, you don't have any of that stuff. So I think we should just make that a thing. It's vampires instead of lizard people. The problem with the Cabal is that it ascribes a sort of individual agency to something that is structural. That's a very good point too, Silopteris. And that's why I always go back to that Carlin video. Do you remember that? Remember that Carlin video? I watched it a couple times when he's on Real Time with Bill Maher, and Carlin completely lays this all out in one like 45-second clip. So it's this is a good point, because when we talk about a cabal, we're basically talking about like what, like a bunch of people in like a creepy room wearing robes, maybe some candles, they're doing some kind of like incantations, secret society shit. And frankly, I do think that does exist. I mean, look at all the secret societies and all the elite universities that all these people go to, Skull and Bones and all this shit. I do think there is an element of that, frankly. But that's not, I don't think that you have like all these rich people just going to you don't go to the annual, like, maybe I do kind of believe that, I don't know. I do think they do go to like rich people parties and do fucked up shit there. I got to admit that I do believe that. But I think what George Carlin says here lays it out pretty well, which is that the fact that these people are working together, it doesn't mean that they're going to the same meetings. It just means that they understand they have shared class interests. So I always like watching this
all
video.
The time.
Right.
Because of these energy policies.
And I love this.
Because of the energy policies that were created here in California, not as a result of a conspiracy, but because...
You don't need a formal conspiracy.
Right.
When interests converge, these people went to the same universities and fraternities, they're on the same boards of directors, they're in the same country clubs, they have like interests, they don't need to call a meeting, they know what's good for them, and they're getting it. And there used to be 7 oil companies, there are now 3, it will soon be 2. The things that matter in this country have been reduced in choice. There are 2 political parties. There are a handful of insurance companies. There are about 6 or 7 information things. But if you want a bagel, there are 23 flavors because you have the illusion. You have the illusion of choice. Right.
I love going back to that, because that, I think, that exactly what we were just saying. That's what it is. It's when you say cabal, you have this kind of like image that in your mind, and it's not quite as complex as that. Even though I do think that kind of shit does in fact happen. But I think the way Carlin puts that is also which is structural. It's a system that's in place, and these people are inherently kind of just taught how to propagate it and how to all mutually benefit from one another. A more recent guest to TrueNut is Norman Finkelstein, and so let's talk about how the anti-Semitic they are. When it's Brace Belden talking to Norman Finkelstein, an anti-Zionist activist who caused controversy last year for calling Holocaust denier David Irving a very good historian, adding, I don't know what a Holocaust denier even is. Irving is, among other things, notorious for urging a German court to fight a battle for the German people and put an end to the blood lie of the Holocaust. I have not heard about that. I mean, I appreciate a lot of the stuff that Norman Finkelstein has done in his anti-Zionism stuff. I've never heard this quote. I imagine this is like being taken slightly out of context, because I know Norman Finkelstein talks often about how his parents and family members were killed in concentration camps. Suggest like they're trying to paint him here as a Holocaust denier, which is like he's talked about the Holocaust many, many times. When reached over Twitter, the TrueAnon podcast declined to comment on whether their speculations might indulge conspiracy theories that have sometimes aligned with anti-Semitism and the far right. Scholar of the far right Shane Burley put it this way to the Daily Beast when trying to critique the inequalities inherent in our economic and political structures: deeply laid anti-Semitic canards and conspiracy theories still hold a lot of emotional power. The same is true in the anti-imperialist left, who, in their effort to critique the excesses, of Western countries and institutions end up using questionable sources, conspiratorial innuendo, and making despotic friends. I fucking hate them. Conspiracy theories are some of the key ways that far-right ideas can creep into left-wing discourse, warping consensus reality and allowing old bigotries such as anti-Semitism to fly unchecked. Yeah, so Shane Burley, if you're anti-imperialist and you say support the right of like the DPRK or Syria or China to, or Venezuela or Iran to like have the freedom to like have an economy that doesn't just go along with whatever the United States State Department tells them what they want to do. If you say those things, then that means that you support these like dictatorial, and means you're just kind of, in a way, you're just as bad. And you can be anti-imperialist, but once you're too anti-imperialist, then it's no good. Once you start saying that we shouldn't be bombing Syria or overthrowing the government in China or perpetrating like disinformation campaigns about these places, then that's bad, according to this guy. This non-Jewish guy just wrote an article accusing 2 Jewish guys of being anti-Semitic in order to prove that communists are bad. Yeah, so Alexander Reed Ross is involved with the State Department. Why are there so many State Department anarchists? It's really starting to drive me nuts how common this is. James C. Scott, funded by a CIA-supported anti-communist organization, and of course it makes sense. And folks, that is why I push back when I see people that kind of claim to be on the left here on Twitch or elsewhere ranting and raving about tankies and the dangers of tankies, because there's a very troubling history involved with that, and there's very, I think, nefarious people that are very interested in ensuring that wedge is there, and that you can be leftist and anti-imperialist, but if you start like going too far, well then you're just as bad. Yeah, we're saying doors like, as everyone always knows, when you talk about the online, the left podcasting community, it's like Jimmy Dore, Red Scare, and True Anon. Those 3 things. Those three kind of they're kind of the main folks that we all listen to. And we go along with them. But let me just address something that Jameson said back up here in the chat. This is interesting. Speaking of lizard people, Lizard Rumsfeld brings up a good point, that in your rush to virtue signal celebrating all women on this Women's Day, you're actually celebrating Casey Anthony. Curious. Oh my goodness. Or like Ava Braun as well. Another woman. Fuck. How deep does this go? Listen, all I'm trying to do is spread positivity to the world. All I'm trying to do is spread positivity. It's International Women's Day. I'm trying to do something nice for people and share a message of hope and solidarity. And then I get attacked. This is the response. Well, yeah. So I think we got to the point of that piece, which is that it was picking and choosing a few very legitimate criticisms, mostly of Jimmy Dore and Red Scare, to then lump others who don't share, I think, a lot of the same values and are actually much more intelligent, much more interesting commentators into that like umbrella as a way to discredit all of it. But as we I think we pointed out many ways that was completely full of shit, suggesting that it's some like weird conspiracy to believe that there's elite sex offenders that control all of our lives and can dominate the economy and politics and entertainment, and work together to ensure that their class interests are being upheld at all times. That's not a conspiracy. That's just like accurately describing something that's going on. All right, that's the end of the video, everyone. Thank you for watching it. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up, hit the bell, leave a comment or whatever, or don't, and I'll talk to you soon, okay? All right, bye.